To get us underway today, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, who is Zachary Clouse. Zach is a winner, or one of the winners of our Historical Society Scholarship many years ago, and a 2021 summa cum laude graduate of Siena College. Zach holds a degree in communications with minors in English and writing and communications, as well as a concentration in multimedia. Zach's present passion for video and audio production and storytelling has led him to some very interesting directions and projects. One such endeavor is his documentary short film, Herrmann, which won the Audience Choice Best Picture and Best Documentary Award at the 2021 Catskill International Film Festival. He's also had a few of his pieces published in a small literary magazine, and has finished a feature-length screenplay. While at Siena, he also volunteered his time at the campus radio station. For those of you who've been to Siena or went to Siena, that's an important piece of life at the Siena campus. Zach grew up fascinated with history. He is particularly interested in the military history of the Second World War. He was fortunate enough to have family who served and survived that conflict. Unfortunately, he never had the opportunity to hear firsthand about their service and experiences. Zach now looks to capture and preserve those veteran stories for future generations before the greatest generation have all passed on. In addition to producing Herrmann, he's currently working on a long-running documentary project called Bridged with Blood, about the role of U.S. Army combat engineers during World War II played. His work can also be followed on Instagram if you're interested in tracking his progress at Vestige Media. So with that, we welcome Zachary to talk about his documentary Herrmann and the process that went into making his film.
Okay, that is not very good. I haven't given a presentation in about a year and a half since I graduated college last year, so I'm a little rusty, I'm a little nervous, but we'll see how it goes. Bear with me. So first of all, thank you guys for coming, and of course thank you to the Historic Society, Joe, and everybody for putting on events like these and doing what you guys do. Because a lot of this is a direct result of information I found here, so thank God you guys do what you do, so thank you. So, if I remember anything from school presentations, usually about anybody, I would start with who Theodore Herrmann is and was. Though, of course, the film discusses this for the most part, so I'll leave most of it to the film. But what I will say is that Herrmann was one of a number of men and women in our community who joined the armed forces during World War II. For a small community, we sacrificed quite a bit. A number of people were impacted, obviously, by the war. And it's also worth noting, and I mentioned it in the film, that he wasn't the only one who was killed in the process during the war. That's not what makes his story special. On the outset, on the outside, the story doesn't stand out because of that. It's not unique to him, unfortunately. But I think what makes it important, and I think that ties into my larger goal is with these types of projects, is that every veteran has a story, and all of them are worth capturing. So that's something I address in the film, and in projects a goal, a theme I want to capture throughout my work. So first, I want to talk about the process a little bit. I've always had an interest in World War II, thanks to my family and my brother especially. And it's specifically, I've had an interest in the people. So obviously you've got the leaders like Eisenhower, Montgomery, FDR, people like that a lot of people know. But then I think specifically on the ground level, it's the individuals on the ground level that I've always been interested in, their stories. Those who had to fight the fight, give of themselves in service on the front line or at the home front, and have those individualized experiences that we can learn so much about the hardships of war from. And I think that lesson is timeless and something we can refer to even today. And I think that's something that's important, especially today. So, as was mentioned, I was very fortunate to have my maternal grandfather around during a lot of my childhood. He was a Marine during the Second World War, served in the Pacific, And from him is where I really started understanding that individual perspective. I discovered basically in college, finally, a way to act on this interest, to combine some other passions of mine with history, to turn it into something like this, a product like this. And it would help me share this history that I feel is so important, because the Second World War, I know it's a specific interest, but it was the largest and bloodiest conflict in human history, and no one was untouched by it. And I think that's evidenced by, even in our community, we lost a number of people to the war. You either served in the service, or you knew someone who was, or you gave up on the home front so much, rationing food, gasoline, things like that. So no one was untouched, and you can feel those effects even now, 75 years later. So I learned that I could combine some passions of my writing, and I've always loved video editing, and combine them to turn it into, at least start a foray into documentary film. So this all started with a family project. Looking at my great uncle, James Scalzo, a combat engineer during the war. And I was looking through old newspapers, Virginia News Herald papers, and I came across that photo, Herrmann's photo, in the newspaper. And it caught my eye for obvious reasons, as it was on the front of the page, and it said, "Vermina man doing something, taking down a propaganda poster." And I had always driven by the sign at the library that we have. We have signs throughout the community of people who were killed in the service. And I had seen his name. I never really registered it. But I recognized, when I saw the photo, I recognized the name. So I wanted to look into it. It was worth, diving into that story. And I think when a lot of people start projects like these, there is a very specific community of people on the internet and social media who are driven by the idea of saving these stories, especially of this generation, the greatest generation, to preserve them for the future. And a lot of them, as was my goal, was to preserve the stories before they pass, so that we can capture their firsthand experiences. So when my grandfather passed away, a good example was that after he passed is when I realized I had all these questions I wanted to ask him, the things I wanted to know, and of course then he was not a source at that point. And unfortunately that's the way it is for a lot of people. But in that same vein, Herrmann had a difference as well, because he also had passed, but he had passed 75 years prior. So you have the challenge of him having died so long ago, and then also not having any living family in the area that we know of. So for the most part, the information was going to be hard to find. It wouldn't be as well preserved. So my father and I did a lot of the research together, and we dove right in. And then senior year of college, I basically had a class project assignment, an applied projects class. We could do whatever we want. And I loved videos, so I wanted to do something video related. And the project was a 5 to 10 minute video. So I was like, I can fit this story into 5 to 10 minutes probably. I'm sure it's fine, all this information I have. So I just kept finding more and more stuff. I looked into death records, yearbooks, anything I could find. Spent a lot of time here, looking through photos and newspaper clippings. And Herrmann, like I said, had no local family members living. He was an only child, so the preservation wasn't there. So I did have some difficulty. I would be remiss if I didn't mention there's a gentleman he's from Belgium, he lives in Denmark now, his name is Yuri Beckers. In his free time, it's not his job, he researches and preserves history of the 9th Infantry Division in the Second World War. It's very specific. So you can reach out to him with information, and he'll send, in his free time, he immediately was willing to help out. He sent casualty listings for the day Herrmann was killed or wounded. You can see it right there, that's a screenshot of it. And he could tell me, he sent information about what the unit was doing that day, so we can pinpoint, what was happening the day he was killed and why it may have happened. And he also sent images of the training yearbooks. And with all of this came even more challenges. Great information, but more challenges came out of it, because he was immensely helpful, but what we noticed, my father and I, we both talked about this, that it was as if at every turn, trying to track down Theodore's story, there was something to stop us from getting to the bottom of it fully. First of all, I mentioned he was an only son, an only child. His parents were German immigrants. The closest family I think he had was in Jersey. His mother had a sister, but locally, there is no more family. So obviously, preservation of original documents is difficult to find. Two, that sign was in town. It's since been fixed. But Theodore Herrmann, his name is spelled incorrectly there. So when we looked at variations of his name, including in that newspaper clipping, it's spelled differently, it's spelled wrong. We found different variations of that name. So that's one issue where, we're looking at different versions of Theodore Herrmann. Not the biggest obstacle, but yet another obstacle. And then lastly, I like this story because, yet again, just something else that tried to get in the way. That overseas researcher, Yuri, said he had a yearbook photo of the training yearbook at Fort Bragg. And he sent it to me. And it was that one right there. And that's also what's listed, also what's listed on the website Find a Grave, which is certainly not it's a great resource for getting started and finding information on deceased members of the military especially. And in a lot of cases, they'll have the image of the grave marker, and they'll also have sometimes an image of the person. That was what was on his image. And I knew I had one photo from the Historical Society going through the yearbooks. And after he was killed, the 1946 school yearbook had his photo in it in memoriam. So I had a photo of him already. So I'm looking at that photo, which is on Find a Grave, of what this gentleman sent me. And I'm looking at the photo I had, and they didn't look like the same person. So part of me wanted to accept that this was him and move on, but something was wrong. So I reached out to him and was like, hey, this is what I've got. This is how I have him looking. Is there a possibility that this is not him? So he goes, you're right. I was looking quickly and I saw it on Find a Grave, so I assumed this was the guy. So there's actually what Herrmann looks like. That's from the Ravenna yearbook. So obviously kind of a difference there. So he sends me, I asked him to send me another photo. He sends a gentleman, I'm not sure if I can't really point to it, but this guy right here is the photo he sent. And again, I'm like, there's still something a little off about him. So I said, all right, could you just scan the whole page, the company H page? So he does it, and we get this, obviously. But yet another thing, in an official military, in a training yearbook for Fort Bragg, they mislabeled it. Because Herrmann is the guy right next to that picture he sent. So even in that, he was mislabeled. So again, there was just things getting in the way over and over again. So we got all this information, got these photos, and Yuri was greatly helpful. So I worked with Yuri. I ended up writing a script. Wanted to hire voice actors because I think having a voice to a lot of these writings is better than just me reading them. So for this class project that's supposed to be 5 to 10 minutes, I ended up missing the deadline by quite a bit. I sent some video in. I was like, listen, I got 15 minutes of this. Not anywhere close to done, but here's a promise that I will send you the final product when it's done. And as someone who has always been stressed about grades all of my life throughout school, despite that, I've always overstressed myself, but despite that, I knew that I didn't want to, and I couldn't compromise Hermann's story for the sake of a grade. Because, this might be the first time I really realized that a grade is so not permanent. People have told me that a million times in my life. But this, I think, is the first time I really understood that a grade doesn't last forever, but an experience and the final product of that work can have a much longer lasting impact. So that's part of the reason I didn't stop, and my father and I didn't stop looking into his story, despite how many challenges we came up against. So in the end, the whole process was so extremely rewarding. It's probably the most rewarding thing I've done in my life at this point. Obviously, there were those awards, the Audience Choice Awards, which is a really, I think, a testament. The community rallied around this guy who died 75 years ago, who we don't know. But the community came out literally in droves and voted for this film, which, I mean, I think is a testament to our community as a whole. The sign was also fixed, another accomplishment from this. But also, most importantly, there are events like this, where his name is being said and remembered and people are seeing it. And I think, if nothing else, that is what I'm most proud of throughout this whole process. So with that, I'm going to show you my film, Herrmann.
It's often said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. One image in the right lens can tell a lifetime of stories. It can provide a glimpse into a past world, and sometimes it can help us save what has been lost. It can remind us of an era, a society, even a person whom time has left behind. Theodore Herrmann is a man worth remembering. His name is not recorded in textbooks, nor on plaques. He has no statues, gave no famous speeches, never held authority. In traditional terms, he has no lasting legacy. His lone street sign honoring his memory even misspells his name. But who years ago gave all that he could give so that his peers could forge on without him. 3/4 of a century ago, Herrmann left the small, upstate town of Ravenna, New York, for the final time. After nearly 8 decades, he has slowly faded from town memory. All that is left is a long-forgotten photograph. Once, at the height of World War II, it was published in hundreds of newspapers across the country. It represented liberation and the hope that a tumultuous period in world history was nearing its end. Now, it sits buried in the annals of history. But even after so long, it can still help us tell his story.
Germany has invaded Poland.
This is London.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press.
General mobilization has been ordered in Britain and France.
This country is at war with Germany.
The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. A state of war.
Theodore William Edward Herrmann was born March 31st, 1915, in Ravenna, New York, the son of Max and Barbara Herrmann. Named after his paternal grandfather, Theodore was a first-generation American. His parents both emigrated from Bavaria, Germany, in the early 20th century. The couple had no other children. Theodore was their only son. Herrmann, nicknamed Dutch by his classmates, attended school locally and graduated in 1933 from Ravenna High School. The 5'10", 190-pound immigrant's son was outgoing, friendly, and well-liked by his peers, and found himself an active member of the community. He spent 4 years in the Athletic Association, 2 as class treasurer, the basketball team manager, tennis player, and sports editor of the school paper, and also spent time as president of the Library Club, treasurer of the Athletic Association, and captain of the magazine Drive. He was a member of the Boy Scouts of America, earning the rank of Life Scout. Following school, Herrmann spent time as the president of the Ravenna Alumni Association and was an active member of the Ravenna Hose Company. Of course, perhaps one of his best documented hobbies was his fascination with stamps. After graduating, he founded the Ravenna Stamp Club, serving as its president as the organization grew, until it was eventually folded into the Hudson Valley chapter of the League for International Fellowship. As the 1940s began, the war in Europe was hitting full swing. But in the States, American military intervention was still nearly 2 years off. While the U.S. practiced an isolationist policy with many Americans hoping to stay out of the conflict, the military still recognized the need to boost its numbers. If circumstances called them to fight, they needed to have the manpower to sustain it. In September 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Selective Service Act. Men ages 21 to 36 were required to register, and in October 1940, the first peacetime draft in American history commenced.
Our present program will train 800,000 additional men this coming year. It is a program, obviously, of defensive preparation.
Young men across the country entered the service in waves. 25-year-old Herrmann was one of the first to leave Ravenna. His number, 194, drawn second in the second call for draftees in early January 1941. He left his job at the Coxsackie Milling Company, where he worked since graduating high school, and along with 12 other local men, left for induction into the U.S. Army on the 15th in Albany, New York. Soon he was on his way south to North Carolina, joining the recently activated 9th Infantry Division at Fort Bragg. There he spent a grueling 13 weeks in basic training with the 9th, a unit nicknamed the Old Reliables, with heritage dating back to the First World War. The troops received a crash course in everything from basic military doctrine, including courtesy and discipline, army organization, marching, and hygiene, to rifle squad, platoon, and company tactics, mine and booby trap identification, marksmanship, heavy weapons training, and mental conditioning. A planned additional 40 weeks of unit training followed in order to prepare the division for potential combat. Herrmann was assigned to the 39th Infantry Regiment Fighting Falcons of the 9th Division and spent the duration of the war with the unit. He was a member of H Company, a heavy weapons section. His specific job is unclear. No records of his duties have been found, but we can extrapolate based on his rank in the standard makeup and use of weapons companies during World War II. The typical weapons company is made of 2 36-man machine gun platoons and 1 58-man mortar platoon, in addition to a headquarters attachment. Heavy weapons companies were often used in support of the standard infantry companies that made up the remainder of the battalion, and thus bore as much of the weight of battle as their rifleman comrades. Flexibility and heavy firepower, the modus operandi.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. President Roosevelt has just announced.
Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island.
In December 1941, Imperial Japanese forces surprised the Americans at Pearl Harbor, officially bringing the United States into the global conflict.
We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Overnight, the attitude of the country changed. Many of those who had lobbied for isolationism now flocked to recruiting stations, eager to join the fight. For Herrmann and many others, months of early preparations suddenly seemed fruitful. Combat, whether with the Japanese or Germans, was imminent. In April 1942, Herrmann returned home on leave before his deployment, as documented by a Ravenna News-Herald clipping. He appeared at a local Rotary Club meeting giving testimony about his 15 months of experience in the service. He said goodbye to his family and friends and returned to maneuvers in North Carolina. It was the last time they would see him alive. By mid-September, the 9th was bound for the Atlantic. Herrmann and the men of the 39th Regiment 9th Division became the first American combat troops to set foot on foreign soil, when they landed overseas at Inverary, Scotland on October 17th. Of course, the United Kingdom was an allied nation. The men's next stop was not nearly as friendly. Just a month later, Herrmann and the 9th Division became the first American troops to engage the enemy in offensive ground operations as a part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. In November 1942, elements of the division arrived in the Mediterranean Sea with a mission: secure the continent's northern coast to protect the vital Mediterranean link to the Middle and Far East. Herrmann's 39th Regiment, alongside the 47th and 60th Regiments, hit the shores at Algiers, Safi, and Port Lyautey in the early morning hours of November 8th, facing resistance from Axis-aligned French soldiers.
I remember when we went into Safi, North Africa, we hit the beaches at 4:45 in the morning and unloaded there, and we took the harbor. We had one man was hit right between the eyes with a 50 caliber bullet that didn't kill him. It went right over the top of his head, through the helmet, and out the backside. He had an awful concussion, but we didn't lose a man.
The inexperienced GIs found initial success. By the 11th, the French resistance had collapsed. During the fighting, the men of the 9th became the first to liberate a city from Axis control in World War II, when the 3rd Battalion, 47th Regiment took Safi. In the coming days, the 9th would move east to Tunisia, where they took an active role in operations against the infamous Afrika Korps, the experienced and battle-hardened German expeditionary force on the continent.
There we were in a bivouac area in the little town of Magenta, right on the little Sahara Desert. Temperatures there were like 120, 130. We had dysentery, we had all that stuff to contend with.
The notorious 9th spent February through May 1943 fighting near the bloody Kasserine Pass and El Guitar, and played a major part, Herrmann's 39th Regiment having a leading role in an offensive drive towards the town of Bizerte, a push which culminated in German capitulation in Tunisia in May 1943, marking the last of German presence in Africa. While overall a success, the losses sustained in the North African campaign called into question the adequacy of out-of-date American equipment and troop preparedness. Yet Herrmann, having experienced his first taste of combat, didn't dampen his belief in the American fighting force. In the final days of the offensive, he penned a short letter home to his family, brimming with optimism.
Dear folks, just a line or two to let you know I'm receiving the News Herald regularly, and I'm glad to keep posted on the news from home. I haven't seen Walter Bronk, Fred Lawson, or anyone else from home as of yet, but hope to any day now. This is a great army I'm in, and growing greater after each encounter with the enemy. Who knows when he's had enough? In 2 years, we've done the impossible and shown the world that the American is as great a defender of liberty as he is a lover of it. Our food is okay. Cigarettes and supplies are fairly easy to get, and our mail service the tops. Who could ask for anything more? Well, this is all for now. Hope you are all in good health and the best of spirits. Regards to all. Yours, Theodore Herrmann.
After Tunisia, the crazy rumor got around that we were going to load on boats for home. We loaded on boats, all right, but for Sicily, which, believe me, was no place like home.
After their first foray into a combat zone, Herrmann's 9th Infantry found just a brief respite from action. By August of 1943, the division shifted gears to the northern Mediterranean in an attempt to fully secure the waters from Axis attacks on shipping, as well as force Germany to divert forces from the Russian front and remove Italy from the conflict. Herrmann's 39th Regiment joined the 82nd Airborne Division as a regimental combat team, fighting in a push north of the beaches of Sicily.
We landed at a little place called Agrigenta, I believe, and went up the west coast of Sicily to Marsala and captured that.
Later, when the rest of the division joined Herrmann's regiment, The 39th drove through the mountains towards Messina, captured Cherami, and directly assaulted the heavily fortified Troina head-on. An 8-day slugfest up rocky heights with a dug-in enemy, resulting in heavy casualties.
I fought the Germans up through Nicosia, Troina, which was barren rock.
We had to stop and slug it out in the mountains all along the way. Like Troina. Pretty mountain town. But after 21 Jerry counterattacks, it looked like this. We won all right, but we paid.
It was during this conflict in Sicily that the 39th Fighting Falcons earned their famous moniker from commanding officer Colonel Harry Flint, AAA, bar none.
The colonel of our regiment, he had a ranch in Texas, and the emblem of that ranch was 3 A's with a zero, with a line through them, 0, which meant anything, anywhere, anytime, bar nothing. And he adopted that as the motto of his regiment. So all of our helmets had AAA bar 0.
The slogan, a testament to their ability in combat, stuck, and soldiers of the 39th soon began painting the acronym on helmets and other equipment. When questioned about the soundness of wearing the identifying marks in combat, Colonel Flint explained, "The enemy who sees our regiment in combat, if they live through the battle, will know to run the next time they see us coming." By mid-August, the 9th Division's fighting in Sicily had come to an end. Following a period of rest and retraining, the unit boarded ships headed for England in November. The 9th had already seen combat in 3 brutal campaigns, but the biggest was yet to come. Overlord. The invasion of Hitler's Fortress Europe.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
Because of its veteran status, the 9th Infantry Division hit the beaches of Normandy, France, on June 10, 1944, 4 days after the initial assault. Entering through Utah Beach, the division engaged the enemy just 2 days later, beginning the crucial drive to seal off the Cotentin Peninsula on the northern coast. A series of conflicts to close off main roads along the western corridor occurred, and their success meant trapping the Germans within the peninsula.
One night when we were moving forward across the peninsula, something like that, we were on this side, and we traveled most of the night. We must have lost our way. And when it got daylight, we were on the other side. And we could see water again, he said. And we radioed back. We're on the other side. And they said, well, dig in, you know, we got the other side. And there was one road that the Germans were using, and we had the high position. And by then, all day long, we just fire alert. Until the road got so blocked up that they couldn't get in there and then stop, and then we'd had them trapped.
The most imperative goal of the drive, however, was one location: Cherbourg.
And our unit, we were the first ones to capture a port of Cherbourg. Yeah, I think that's what it's called, Cherbourg.
At the green tip of Normandy, the town of Cherbourg lay, a harbor for supplies. Our need for ports was vital as our breath. The German knew our lack and swiftly drew his forces into tight defensive groups so to contest the issue. All our plans turned upon Cherbourg. All our strategy waited upon its empty docks and piers. So the Americans, sent all across Normandy to the coast, swung toward the north, impatient for the port. Through hedge and field, they carved their heavy way.
prior to the invasion, the Allied command knew that quick reinforcement and buildup of troops was crucial. American units and equipment coming from the States had to be unloaded and reloaded in the UK before departure for France. But if they could capture a deep water port in France, troops and supplies could be brought directly from the States. Cherbourg was that port, the largest accessible in the area. It was thus vital not only to the Normandy campaign, but to the entire war effort against Nazi Germany. On June 18th, the regiments of the 9th, including Herrmann's 39th, reached the west coast of the Cotentin Peninsula, isolating the German units at Cherbourg from possible reinforcement. Within a day, the division, alongside the 4th and 79th Infantry, began a push north. 48 hours later, the units were in striking distance of the critical port. Despite being surrounded and low on supplies, the German garrison commander, with some 21,000 men, refused offers of surrender. So the American assault began on June 22nd. The Americans met stiff initial resistance but slowly cleared the enemy from bunkers and concrete pillboxes. In conjunction with naval bombardments of the fortifications, ground units finished off the organized defense and captured the garrison commander. By June 29th, the harbor and arsenal had surrendered. Cherbourg and the Cotentin Peninsula were now securely in American hands. It was here, too, as he walked the streets of Cherbourg, that Theodore Herrmann, now a sergeant, was first seen by thousands of Americans. As he and thousands of U.S. troops poured into the newly liberated port, Herrmann spotted a familiar sight, an illustration of the Boot of Italy, whom he had stood a shore away from just a year ago, tacked to a board. The enemy propaganda posters sneered at the Allies' slow progress in the Mediterranean, depicting a snail holding a British and American flag with the caption in both French and English, "It's a long way to Rome." As he stood, surrounded by a triumphant American army, Herrmann took out his trench knife and smiled. A photographer captured this image, circulated by the Associated Press to hundreds of newspapers across the country. From a small town of less than 3,000, Herrmann's name now on the lips, and grin in the eyes of thousands of hopeful Americans on the home front. This caption from a Virginian paper.
June 1944. Sergeant Theodore Herrmann of Ravenna, New York, chuckles as, with his trench knife, he rips one of Herr Goebbels' propaganda posters off the wall of a Cherbourg building. The poster is a map of Italy, showing British and American forces in the south symbolized by a slow-moving snail, with the caption, "It's a long way to Rome." Doesn't look so far now, does it?
After the capture of Cherbourg, the 9th continued their push through the hedgerow country of France. The unit helped in the American breakout from the Normandy beachheads in Operation Cobra, and later suffered heavily in the brutal combat of the infamous Hurtgen Forest, along the Belgian-German border, a location which earned the monikers the Death Factory and the Meat Grinder. In the wet, cold, and cloudy weather, Herrmann and the 9th became the first American unit involved in the Hurtgen Forest fighting in mid-September 1944, where they fought an entrenched German army intent on holding the area for a future winter offensive. Soon they were joined by 10 other infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions, though tanks were often ineffective due to the dense woods, which hampered mobility and allowed German anti-tank teams plenty of cover.
We're in the Hurtgen Forest, and that was rough. I mean, I went in there the first day, and the bodies I seen are bloated and blown apart, and
And were you ever scared or fearful?
Always, yeah. But it was part of the atmosphere of our in the Hurtgen Forest. Everybody was very careful in the early afternoon to be in their foxholes because the Germans would send a few rounds of their 88 millimeter cannon. There was always somebody getting hurt or somebody having a psychological breakdown.
And so how did you cope with their deaths?
You basically learn to live with it, to adapt to it.
In all, the U.S. First Army estimated between 33,000 and 55,000 Americans killed or wounded over 4 months in the dense woods, making it one of the costliest engagements of the war. In the winter of '44, the 9th saw battle in the Ardennes forest in Belgium, the site of a last-ditch German counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. Through blizzards, frostbite, trench foot, and artillery shelling, the 9th Infantry Division moved in support of battered American units being rapidly pushed back by the German attack, arriving in the area on December 17, 1944. The notorious 9th helped hold the line and repel the attack. A Stars and Stripes newspaper said of the events, "Neither rain, nor snow, nor Hitler's SS can stop the 9th Infantry Division." As winter began turning to spring in early 1945, the German military situation looked bleak. Running low on men, gasoline, and other supplies, the German army fought last-ditch efforts for every inch of land as the Allies marched towards Berlin. The advance, however, was not slowing much. As February 1945 rolled around, it seemed the European war was nearing its end. On February 27th, Herrmann and the 9th Division prepared for a push south from Leversbach, Germany. The 2nd Battalion 39th Infantry, of which Herrmann's H Company was a part, moved towards the town of Thum at 4:45 a.m., taking and holding the town in the face of mortar and small arms fire, and a strong battalion-strength counterattack at 9:30. In conjunction with the 1st and 3rd Battalions, the attack was continued early the following morning, Herrmann's company's heavy weapons supporting the 3 rifle companies' advance. Again, on the 28th, the 2nd Battalion launched their drive at 4:45 a.m., pushing east towards Freudsheim. In the early afternoon, the unit came in contact with a German anti-tank gun emplacement on their left flank, which temporarily halted the advance of the leading company. Simultaneously, small arms and mortar fire opened up on their right. When the anti-tank gun was knocked out, the advance continued, but almost immediately after, the unit again came under German small arms fire. Then, suddenly, from a distant ridgeline on the right, German self-propelled artillery fire. Suddenly, a burst of metal shards rips into Herrmann's face, along his jaw. He is violently thrown to the ground, the concussive blast and blood loss staggering him. Dazed and in pain, Herrmann surveys the scene around him. A number of H Company men are down, wounded by the same blast. His comrades scream for help, and medics rush to their aid. One stops at Herrmann's side and kneels, and just for a moment, hesitates. Then, he gets to work, patching what he can in the field to try to stabilize him before moving the wounded GI. Herrmann is rushed to a field hospital, a pop-up tent in a flat patch of German countryside, filled with battered men. Medical staff surround him. Officially, he is diagnosed with a concussion. He has been hit by shrapnel, hot metal fragments splintered off an artillery shell, which have penetrated his head. His nerves and arteries are remarkably intact, but blood quickly flows from his wounds. Field surgeons weigh his chances. Shards of metal are still lodged in Herrmann's head. An aide leans down and gives him penicillin to prevent infections. But infections are not the pressing issue right now. It's impossible to tell, after all these years, how conscious Herrmann was of his surroundings that day in late February. Whether he recognized where he was or what was happening as he lay in the field hospital, or if the pain was too immense to remain cognizant. But what we can extrapolate, based on his life to this point and the circumstances. Somewhere in Germany, Theodor Herrmann lays on a cot, losing blood profusely, and thinks of home. Of his job at the Coxsackie Milling Company, his 4th grade honor roll achievement, his classmates, his fellow athletes, his remarkable stamp collection, assembled over years of attending local conventions, compiling, and saving. He thinks of his parents, and how difficult it will be for them if he doesn't make it home. He is an only child, after all. The immigrant's son is just 4 weeks shy of his 30th birthday. He wonders how he will celebrate. His parents have probably already sent their gift. The mail service on the front was still pretty good. It should be here soon, he figures. He wonders how often his parents think of him, what they wish for him. They've always been good parents, supportive, not nosy. As night falls on the 28th, he thinks about the irony of dying in the country his parents left. But as he takes his final breath, he knows that he has spent the last few years giving life and limb for the dream they so desired. They were safe at home. The war nearly finished. Theodor's job was done.
News of servicemen. Word was received by Mr. and Mrs. Max Herrmann on Sunday that their only son, Theodor, had been reported to have died from wounds received in action in Germany on March 1st. Theodor was a staff sergeant assigned to the 30th...
In late April 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself. Just a week later, on May 8th, German military representatives met with Allied leaders in Berlin and signed the Instrument of Surrender. After nearly 6 years, the war in Europe was finally over, and the Nazis defeated. Staff Sergeant Theodor Herrmann had made it through some of the fiercest fighting of the Second World War, seeing combat in Africa, Sicily, France, and into Germany. 4 years in the service, but died of his wounds sustained in action on March 1st, 1945, just 3 months before the war's end. He was initially buried in Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium. For years, a young local woman adopted and took care of his grave. In 1947, Herrmann's parents received a letter from her.
February 1947. I frequently visit the grave of your son and take the liberty to adorn it with flowers out of a sentiment of deep thankfulness for the great sacrifice this dear young and brave man had to offer on our behalf. I wish I could tell how much I feel for you and how well I understand the immensity of your sacrifice. Let me have a part in your motherly suffering, and may it be a consolation to you that there is someone near your son's grave who lovingly takes care of this last resting place. In a short time, I shall be able to send you a special photo of your dear son's grave. I send my kindest and very respectful love. Your little Belgian friend, Lucy Williams.
Theodore Herrmann was not the only one to leave Ravenna and join the fight. He wasn't even the only man to be killed in the process. But his story, like so many others, deserves to be remembered. Theodore's voice hasn't been heard in 75 years, since the waning months of the Second World War. He himself can no longer tell his story or the story of his famous photograph. But he doesn't need to. His picture speaks volumes.
For coming and viewing, I appreciate it. I think it, I guess if there are any questions, that's all I've got.
One picture of the house, the brick house, looks like his mother standing on the second.
It's not video of his mom, but yeah.
Oh.
I didn't have images of it, but it's just, you know.
Do you know where that house is located?
I don't. I actually thought it was my grandparents' house, because I thought I recognized it. I haven't confirmed that it is or not. I'm not sure where the shot was taken. That was footage in town.
It looks like the house on River Road.
Oh, yeah? You know that you wouldn't happen to know the number, would you?
I want to say it's like 7, but I mean, you can't miss it. It's from around the corner bend.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It's
Yep.
right there. It's a good brick house.
Gotcha, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what.
It's next to the church. Yeah, what is it? Baptist church.
Okay. Gotcha. I'll have to drive by there and take a look. Yeah, I don't know whose house it was or the woman, but I thought it was representative at least. So.
Where did you find the letter from Belgium?
That was printed in the News Herald. So thank God for the News Herald printed a lot of the messages home. There throughout, we looked through all those newspapers, and there was always a section on news from servicemen. That's how, one, we got the letter from him to his family and friends back home. And the News Herald reprinted that, just as a message to the town about where he's at. We know, I think that was 2 years afterwards, right before his body came back, that woman wrote the letter, and then they shared the letter with the local newspaper. Because the community, as you can tell by, I mentioned it at the end, that the procession for his funeral was one of the largest, described as one of the largest, that had ever gone through that cemetery. So he was very well loved by the community. So the parents, and in the years following his death, often put a memorial thing in every year and put poetry. They also thanked his mother, made a couple of, put a couple messages in the newspaper thanking the community for their outpouring of support and love. And another thing I love is that they are immigrants. They weren't born here, but the community rallied around them and accepted them as that they were just part of the community, which I love. So I think that's a very strong message there.
And do you know if that was a program to bring bodies back?
I don't. I know that often happened, that the bodies would be brought back just so, close to family. But I'm not sure how that got underway with regards to his body in particular.
Zachary, how did you connect with the historian in Belgium?
The internet is phenomenal. Thank God for the internet, because I don't know how we wouldn't know so many things about him. We wouldn't have that particular photo of him in the training, and we also wouldn't know where he was wounded necessarily, because I literally was just looking on the internet, like, is there any association I could talk to about finding information pieces of, maybe they have documents. And there was the 9th Infantry Division Association, which is for veterans and things like that. But all research requests on their website, they direct to this guy in Belgium. So they literally link you to 9th Infantry Division in World War II for information, from these years. So I reached out to him in a request thing, and it was like totally free, and he's not getting paid for this. But in his free time, he has a massive collection and is writing a book and has Facebook groups dedicated to the 9th Division. So I was really, through a quick Google search, to be honest, and finding his contact information and just trying to see what I could get back from him. So thank God I did.
Has he seen the film?
Yes, he put it up on his website. He has a pretty extensive website of information about the 9th, and he has a couple of pages dedicated to people and their families who have put together something about a member of the division or the unit. So he added that to his unit, or to his website, and he was very happy that he could be of assistance. I mean, again, this probably would not have been done without him. So he knows, and he's very appreciative of it. And I updated him on the sign. He was very happy to hear about that, the fix of the sign and everything. So.
What grade did you get from your professor?
I want to say an A. I should have been an A, so I'm going to guess an A. Yeah. I can't quite remember.
What grade did your father get?
I left Dad out of that part. I said, this is the research we did together, the editing and everything. I spent a week locked in my room just putting it all together. So the turnaround time was supposed to be a month on this, and it went a little bit over, but yeah, it was basically a month or so.
Well, thank you for remembering.
So, yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. Like I said, it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done so far, and it makes me want to continue this. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.